I'm Drew,
I'm Stephanie.
and this is the first episode of the Young Americans podcast. So, just as a quick little start, since this is our first episode, not everyone might know exactly what YAF is. Maybe you've heard of us, maybe you haven't. YAF, essentially, there's this nationwide parent organization, Young Americans Foundation, and we're a chapter of that. So, we're Young Americans for Freedom at Loyola Marymount University. And YAF is a conservative group for young Americans, hence the name. And so we strongly believe in pro-American, pro-conservative, pro-capitalism values. One of our founders was Ronald Reagan, and so we have very traditional conservative views, limited government, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the Constitution, all that good stuff. And what would you add on to that, Stephanie?
We're an organization that thrives off of individuality, free thought, and equal opportunity. A little bit about what we do as a chapter is we promote activism on campus. So during 9/11, we also do memorials. We've done Freedom Week, and we've also hosted speakers, including Ben Shapiro, Elisha Krauss, and Andrew Clavin and Michael Knowles. And we give students the opportunity to attend retreats at Reagan Ranch and across the country.
Yep, sounds great. And then I guess, because we say like conservative, like we're a conservative group, you're a conservative, I'm a conservative. What do you think being conservative means? Because I know that there's a lot of different definitions. Some think it means like old fashioned, like American Revolution values. Some think it means like Ronald Reagan values. Some thinks it means just like anti-progressive. Like what does being conservative mean to you, I guess, specifically?
Well, being conservative means all of those things, honestly, but to me, it means holding the values and traditions that our nation was founded upon. So for me, I'm a free thinker and I'm willing to engage in conversation with other people, regardless of whether they're conservative or liberal or anywhere in between. And it's just kind of holding true to my own values and myself. What about you?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think that the main part of being a conservative, at least for me, and I think for a lot of people in YAF, is that it's preserving the ideals and the fundamental values that America was founded upon. And so, of course, we're not following like literally every single letter, but it's the idea is like the Constitution, essentially, the rights that we're afforded by God, like freedom to religion, right to bear arms, freedom to peacefully assemble, freedom of speech, especially nowadays, freedom of speech is a very big one. And so it's just preserving those values, preserving the Constitution, and preserving just the American way, I guess you'd say.
Yes, I definitely agree.
And so I guess going off that, why are you conservative? Like how did you become a conservative? Were you always conservative? Did you change your political views at any point? Why did you end up thinking the way you do now?
So I've always identified as a conservative. My parents were conservative. I grew up with Catholic values, which are pretty traditional. Um, and I feel like even though my family didn't talk about them much at home, I feel that throughout high school and throughout college, I've also become more conservative. And I feel like the values and traditions that we hold or that I was raised into have helped me grow as the person that I am today. How about yourself?
Um, yeah, because so I was also raised Catholic. I've kind of always been that way, and then that's probably we're a Catholic school now, so building off that. And then I wasn't always conservative though. I wasn't really sure about my politics until probably about like high school, maybe late middle school. I wasn't really even aware of politics. But I think definitely growing up, I don't know exactly where I line up on the spectrum, but I was definitely like anti right wing. I was definitely like very like not very left leaning, but I was definitely left leaning because I don't know, that's just like the way I grew up because my parents actually weren't, but I didn't even know what their political views were until much later on. But my parents never really inculcated me like political values in me, and so I just kind of went around, and I was very influenced by I think a lot of like the schools and the media and this and that and whatnot. I didn't really get a super like biased history of like or American history until like probably high school, but by that point I think I was kind of catching on to what was going on. But I think the biggest thing, actually, the thing I vividly remember was growing up I watched The Simpsons a lot, and The Simpsons were very left leaning. Like the thing I vividly remember is that there was like a big castle with like a lightning and like stormy weather, and it was like the national like Springfield Republicans like meeting or whatever, and like all like the evil, greedy, bad people were there, like Mr. Burns, and like all like the bad people were all the like the nasty Republicans. And so I kind of had that mind through. I was like, oh yeah, like those guys they're bad, they're evil, like they're not good. The conservatives, the right wingers, like they're bad. And so like I didn't really have any political views, but all I knew is that the right wing was bad, the left wing was good. And so I kind of just grew up like that. And then the when the 2016 election came around, I wasn't really I couldn't vote anyway. I was 16, so I couldn't vote, but I wasn't really sure because I was kind of in the camp where I didn't really like either candidate for reasons. I didn't really have any political values. I was just like, I didn't really know much at the time. I didn't like anyone, so I was like, oh, whatever. And then, Donald Trump won the election, and at the time, I was really big into watching Stephen Colbert, and so I watched a ton of his YouTube clips online, and I just kept watching a ton. After the election, of course, Stephen Colbert was constantly going off on Donald Trump, and he was making all these jokes, and I loved it at the time. I was really into it. I was like, yeah, he's taking it to him. He's showing him who's boss. Like he's like pointing out that he's like a Nazi and all this and that. And I just kept watching. I thought it was really funny, but then I don't know. At some point, like it just kind of started to wear on me. Like every single episode he had was like Trump's evil, Republicans are evil, conservatives are evil. This is bad. This is bad. Like it was the same thing over and over and over and over. And I remember like one episode he did. It was like about like weed or something completely irrelevant. And I was like, I was so refreshed. It was weird. I was like, thank goodness he didn't do another Trump one because it was getting old. Like, but then that was kind of where I started realizing like all he does is kind of go after Donald Trump and the Republicans, and that kind of made me like start questioning, like I don't know, maybe I should like look more into this like politics stuff. And then that was at the time where there was like a kind of thing going on in the YouTube community because I watch a lot of YouTube videos. I follow a lot of creators. There was a big like and like they call it the SJWs, the anti-SJW movement that was really big on YouTube like around that time because of the election and all that. And so there were like a couple of these videos, like it was really easy to point out like the far crazy left wing people and be like, oh well, yeah, they're obviously wrong. But I didn't really look much into it. But then I saw it was like a compilation of like I think it was some like SJW compilation thing. I don't know, but there was one clip from um I'm sure we all know him, Ben Shapiro, and I saw him and I was like, hey, this guy's kind of cool. Like he's got some interesting ideas, and so I went and like watched some of his lectures and his speeches, and like I started watching his stuff, and I was like, this guy makes a lot of sense. I don't know, like he's this kind of sounds like what I like because I've always been a fan of the country and I always really liked America, and so I got really down with like all the people, all like the left wing people I would constantly see like putting down the country and like saying America sucks and it's awful. Then like people like Ben Shapiro come around and say like, no, like America's great, it's amazing. We have all these amazing fundamental values, and I like that because I always did like the country. So I was like, yeah, like I like these guys are like kind of saying something I like, and I want to like, why do they think this? Like, why is the country great? Because I didn't really know. I just liked it. And so I kind of started looking into it more. I watched a lot of Ben Shapiro, watched a lot of other YAP speakers like Dinesh D'Souza, and I started seeing like Steven Crowder and like all like the classic like they're kind of like memes at this point, but all like the big name conservatives. And then like I don't know, just ever since high school, I've been going more into politics, kind of learning, like what it means to be conservative, looking more deeply into politics. I still follow Ben Shapiro, but like I follow a lot of other people now. I've kind of expanded my political views, and it's still always changing. And so that's kind of how I ended up being conservative. Is like I was just kind of automatically left wing because I'm from the Seattle area, so it was a very left wing area, left wing culture. Watched a lot of like left wing media. The schools were kind of left wing, not really until high school though, and I just kind of grew up in that culture. And then I started seeing the opposite end of it, and I was like, oh, like I think I agree with these guys more. Like I was convinced by their arguments and their thinking. I was like, I believe these people. I think that their arguments make sense. I think that what they're saying is true. I believe that the country is good, and they think the country is good, and they can justify why. And I really liked that, especially in a time where it felt like a lot of people weren't respectful of America. They didn't like America. They thought the country was evil, and that was the time where I started realizing that like why do I like the country? Why do I believe what I believe? And when I actually started to look at it, I realized that I wasn't left leaning. I was actually very right leaning. I was a conservative. When I actually realized like why, when I started to look at the reasoning behind all these arguments and the reasoning behind why I thought what I did. And so that's a bit of a longer story, but that's how I ended up where I am today, pretty much.
I think it's so interesting how you talked about labels and people just siding with one another because as kids, you can't just label yourself as something when you don't really know the full extent of what you're like thinking about or believing. So I thought that was super interesting. And like a little story, side story that like just remembered was when I was younger, my dad was talking about limited government versus like government overreach. And for some reason, as a kid, I was like, small government is good, right? And then my dad's like, yeah, it's very good. So that was when I had like my little conservative moment as a kid. But it is really hard to label yourself.
Yeah, there's kind of this funny thing I've noticed recently. I don't know, where it's like people really seem to like I think like it's a pretty universal thing, at least in America, to say we don't like taxes, we don't like big government, we don't like this, we don't like that, and yet it keeps like the government keeps getting bigger. There keeps being more taxes. The same career politicians keep getting elected. It's like, well, if everyone, if we can all agree that the fact that like we don't like these things, why do these things keep? It's just kind of a funny thing, like with the limited government. Like I think most people would agree that less government or less bureaucracy, less this, less that is good. Yet it keeps growing. And it's kind of weird. It's like, well, if everyone hates it, then why is it still going? I don't know.
It's
I don't know
like
what's
to
going
try
on.
and limit government, you want to like grow the government. It's kind of like a weird oxymoron, but
Yeah, it's weird because I don't. Yeah, the problem is like eventually it gets hard to like figure out like okay like what do you want to cut, because you can say like oh like let's cut this, and like all the people like no we can't cut that, let's cut this, and you're like well you can't cut that, and then you because you can't argue exactly what to make smaller, and so it's hard to shrink. It's very easy to grow the government. It's very hard to shrink the government.
definitely.
And so then, kind of going off of why you were conservative, how did you end up finding about YAF, like just the national chapter, or the LMU chapter? Like how did you get involved in YAF? How did you figure out YAF existed?
I actually have a really funny story about that I'll talk about in a minute. But when I was a freshman at LMU, I really wanted to get involved in politics. I was involved senior year because it was election year, so my government class wanted us to participate or like get involved with elections. So we did a lot of that kind of thing. So I knew I kind of liked politics going into college, but I actually didn't hear about YAF until my sophomore year. I think it was about a year or a couple semesters old when Clavin and Knowles actually came on campus. I didn't go see them, but I watched the rerun. And it actually caused like campus wide distress, which is kind of so funny. And my roommate actually walked in and said, like, I can't believe they did this. And I was like, who did what? And then I looked and I was like, oh, I like that. So I decided to join the next semester, which is kind of funny seeing as Ben Shapiro actually came the next semester. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, I remember the Cleveland. That was actually my first YAF thing because I joined my freshman year and like right when I got in. So yeah, that was their Cleveland Knowles my first event, which was kind of cool because like they were two like or no actually I think Bert Folsom was our first one. Yeah, I think Bert Folsom was first, and then Michael. Yeah, Michael Knowles, Andrew Cleveland. That was I remember that was a big one though. Yeah, that definitely I put our name on the radar, I guess, of everybody. That was a fun time,
Definitely.
yeah. But how did I learn? Yeah, so I think I didn't even know LMU had a YAF chapter, and I vaguely knew of YAF. I only knew them pretty much just because I would see like Ben Shapiro, Dinesh, just so they'd have like the YAF logo behind them on like the boards, and like the guy would come and be like, "Hey, I'm from YAF," and like I would usually skip that intro though because I just want to hear the speech, and so um yeah, like I vaguely knew of YAF, like the name was familiar, and I knew the logo. And so then like when I went to LMU, there was a big like the Get Involved fair, and like with all the student organizations set up their booths and this and that, and I was walking around, and I saw like oh like there's YAF. It's like I know these guys are from like the Ben Shapiro talks, and so I went over and said like hi. And they kind of explained everything. I was like oh like this is the like conservative political group. I'm like that's cool. I want to get involved with that, and so I did, and now I'm here.
Yeah. It's funny how pathways work.
Yeah, like we got a ton of people just from when we brought Ben Shapiro, like because we said like, hey, like if you're part of YAF, you get to like take pictures of Ben Shapiro, like stuff like that. So like we got a ton of people join up just for that. Then some of those people didn't come back, some of those people did. So like you could tell like just the name drawing alone gets people involved. So everyone learns, I guess, through different ways. And then I guess like I'm sure you know this, but like at YAF, we always like to ask, what's your biggest issues? Like as a conservative, what is your biggest issue? Like Second Amendment, free speech, the economy. Like what's your big issue that you get really invested about or something?
Mm. I actually have two. I can't choose between either of them. So my first is free speech. And I feel like that's a given. Like with social media and just Hollywood in general, we have like censoring issues. So free speech is super important to me, and as well as abortion. As a Catholic, obviously we're all pro-life, but also as a conservative, it's important to value life especially at the beginning when they're not just a clump of cells, when they can actually feel things. And I've like learned a lot about that through some of our speakers, and just being able to talk about abortion and knowing the stats and the influence it has over women is like super important to me.
Yeah, definitely. Those are all pretty good issues. Like the pro-life one's definitely one I've picked up on more. So like the more I get invested in politics, and of course, like yeah, as a Catholic. But I think for me, I'd say the biggest issue might be I don't know how to word it properly. The right of the individual, like just to like the individual versus the collective, or like public versus private, like very much like keeping the government or keeping like overreach out of the lives of the people, and like just making sure that people have the freedom to do what they want as an individual, ensuring their individual rights, stuff like that. So I don't know if you'd call that limited government or if you'd call that the freedom of the individual, but what something like that, yeah. So the just making sure that the individual is still an individual. They're not controlled by the state or they're not controlled by some like other like a group. Like it's just retaining individuality. But I think especially more recently, like as time goes on, like I think free speech is becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger issue. And it's not even just like legal free speech, because I think legal free speech, I think we have some dangerous things going on with that. But I think the biggest issue with freedom of speech right now is just like a culture of having freedom of speech. And I think that a lot of people don't want it, or they're not inculcating that culture of free speech. Like for instance, like I know some people don't think cancel culture is real, but people are getting canceled, and I think that like it's not healthy for a free speech environment. Like I don't know if you've seen anything like today or yesterday, but the big thing is that the Mandalorian actress was canceled.
Yeah.
I can't remember her name. I know she plays Cara Dune. I'm really bad with names, but
Gina Carano.
yes, that's her. So it's stuff like that where it's like it's not illegal. Like yes, like Disney can fire an actress whenever they feel like it, but it's like, but should we be? And it's that kind of concerning issue where it's like yes, you can do these things. There's nothing illegal technically, but it's not a healthy thing, and especially like in a country where we espouse like freedom of speech and all these like freedoms and stuff like that. It's not great for the culture, because eventually if that culture comes into law, then there won't be free speech laws. And so like it's kind of a dangerous starting point. It's not very healthy for the country, I don't think, to just be like essentially removing people from the public space or like canceling them or whatever you want to call it, just for statements they say, even if they're wrong. Like even if someone says something bad or wrong, like is that justifiable to then just like remove them from work or remove them from society or whatever? Like I think we need to be careful about how and when we just do stuff like that, and how we like kick people off of social media or like remove them from work. It's a dangerous environment, I think, to be creating that kind of a culture. So I think we just need to be careful about how we take that, I guess.
I definitely agree. Free speech kind of goes along with your individuality, individualistic versus collectivistic idea. I don't know. It's not very individual. Like you're not really promoting individualism if you're not allowing free speech. And it doesn't matter if it's like a private or public platform. You still need to like have that kind of dialogue, or else everyone's just going to be in an echo chamber, and that's just not good for anyone. So
Yeah, like because I know there's like the whole thing. Like I just want to stress this point is that we're not saying it's illegal to like be like firing these people or kicking them off social media, stuff like that. Like they can do that. Like it was like we like when you believe in the individual, and like companies and individual people to do what they want. Like Twitter can do what they want, Facebook can do what they want, Disney can do what they want. Like we're not saying it's illegal. We're not saying that there should be like laws against it, but we're saying like think about think about it maybe before you fire people or you remove them from your social media, or you just like I think we just need to be more like culturally aware of that. Like it's again, it's not illegal. It's just something we should keep an eye on, I think.
definitely.
So then, kind of going off the like just the whole like culture and everything. I know that a lot these days, there's very there's a lot of animosity between people, and like it's very people are finding it very hard to get along with people that they don't agree with, or they have like serious political issues with. Like people stop like being friends with people over who they voted for and this and that. Like, and so what are some people that you think you like disagree with politically but still get along with totally fine, whether it be like left versus right, or like they are like pro-choice or pro-life, something like that? Like are there people, do you have friends like that, do you have family like that, or anyone that you really disagree with but you're still friends with?
I've been lucky. I haven't had people that I've really disagreed with in terms of friends and family, but I do have friends and role models that disagree with like certain parts of politics. So, for example, limited government versus a little bit more government control, stuff like that. I do have friends and role models that I do disagree with, but I don't intentionally try to bring politics into a conversation because I know that would make the relationship a lot more strained or tense. And so I feel like that's an important thing to take away from. Like, it's not just politics at the end of the day. You got to, like, people have got to remember that they're people too. And the character doesn't necessarily, or stereotypes don't necessarily define someone specifically. So, what about you? Do you have any friends, family, relatives, etc.?
Um, I definitely have relatives. Like the good thing is like with my relatives, I'm able to get along with them because I think like it definitely helps when you're family because I think family definitely comes before any kind of politics. And so yeah, I have a lot of family who are on like who are not conservative, who are on like the other end of the political aisle, if you want to say that, like however you want to say it politically. They're not. We don't agree on a lot of things, but we're still like we're family. We can get along. We can talk. Like we don't. Like we try not to talk about politics at all because you know that's like you were saying. Like just it's if you don't need to bring up politics, just probably don't bring up politics. Probably not a good idea. But
Yeah.
yeah, like when politics does come up, like we can have a fine conversation. Like even if we get like a little heated, like next time we see each other, like we're totally fine. Like we're just hanging out, doing whatever. Like we can see each other on Thanksgiving and not like be still like hating each other from like how we disagreed about like Antifa like like a month ago or whatever. Like it's not like massive like shifts. It doesn't need to be because like I disagree like pretty strongly I think with them on a lot of issues, but it doesn't need to be that way. And then with friends, like with friends especially, we just don't bring up politics. But like with my friend group, it's kind of unspoken where it's like we just won't talk about politics. It's like um they knew that I'm with YAF and that like I had like I showed like my picture with Ben Shapiro, and so like they know that kind of where I lie, but I never like force it out there, like because like Ben Shapiro was like kind of like a meme. So I was like, hey guys, look, like funny, I'm with Ben Shapiro, and they're like, oh, that is funny. And so like we kind of keep it more so that way. We're like, if something funny in politics happens, we'll be like, hey, like look, this was like a funny thing that happened in politics. It's like, oh yeah, that's funny, but like we don't really bring it up too much. I think I get the feeling though that I wouldn't necessarily agree with my friends if we really got into it though, because I have a feeling that a lot of them, especially, aren't very like pro-capitalist or like pro certain things. And so I would get the feeling that we would have a lot of disagreements if we actually sat down and talked about it. But they're still great friends. I still get along with them a lot. And actually, in high school, I had a friend. Well, we're still friends. We don't talk as much still with college, but I had a friend who was pretty much communist. Like I'm pretty sure he self-identified as communist, but it was really funny because like we would have like really like heated discussions, but like we were really good friends. We always hang out, we always talked, and like he was the kind of person who like we had an argument where he literally said we need to nationalize everything. Like he's like everything should be nationalized 100%. And I was like, that's not a good idea. Please don't nationalize everything. And we would have debates like that. And so, but then we'd be totally fine. Like we'd be really good friends. We'd hang out. We'd play games. We'd go to class. Like just I don't know. Like somehow we were like on complete opposites of the political spectrum, and yet we're still really good friends. And so I think that because I think that I knew at the end of the day that he wasn't doing that like out of animosity or like hatred. Like he wasn't like I want to be communist and like oppress all like the people who disagree with me, and I'm going to be far left and like just because I like hate all these people and I want to remove these people. Like they're like these people have horrible ideas and they're awful and they shouldn't be like. He was very. I think he was doing it from a good place. Like he was saying, like we need to nationalize everything because it helps the poor people because like they need this like help and support and it needs to be like fair and equal and all that. I get that. I get that like he has good intentions and so I don't think that like I can get along with him. I think thought the same way about me where it's like he didn't think that I was some evil person who wanted to like hoard all the like country's money and that like the 1% should own everything and stuff like that. Where I think that as long as you can agree that like you're both acting like in good faith and that you both have everyone's interests in mind and that you're doing what you think is best, not what's best for you or for your group or whatever, I think that you can get along. It's the problem is that when you have people on like social media where you have no idea what they're like, maybe they are like evil, awful people, maybe they're not like, but a lot of times they assume that you are. And so like you can say, oh, like I'm like pro-life. They'll be like, oh, like you want to oppress women and you hate like women and you want to like remove women's rights and like there's no you're not there's no common ground. You're not saying like we both can agree that we both have like women's rights and interests. We can both agree that we have all these things, like we're acting in good faith. But I don't think people acknowledge that, or they don't know that, or you can't really be sure on social media. And so I think everyone assumes that their opponents are acting in bad faith, that they're evil or bad. And so I think that's really where the problem is that the people you don't know very well, and you don't know if they're acting in good faith. I think the problem is when that starts to like infect into your actual friendships, where like you start being like, oh, like I'm really good friends with this person, but they're pro-life, therefore they must be evil. And like that's where I think it gets dangerous, where it's like you know that they're acting in good faith, but the culture is so skewed where it's like everyone on the other end must be bad and evil, that you start to like actually think that your friends are bad and evil. And I think that we need to be careful of that, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It just kind of reminded me a lesson that, I mean, it's not really a lesson that I've learned this year, but it's just a lesson that has been emphasized. It's okay to disagree with people. Like, it's
Mm.
okay to agree to disagree. You don't have to, like, get everyone to be on your side or win the argument, because at the end of the day, that's not what matters. It's the fact that you're having a conversation in the first place. And if you can, like, get along in every other aspect, that's great, you know?
Yeah, like I think that's like yeah, I like agree to disagree. Like for instance, you said like role models. Like a lot of my role models, I think, are very would probably not agree with me politically, but even like ones that do agree a lot, like Ben Shapiro. Like I have some things I disagree with Ben Shapiro on. Like obviously he's Jewish and I'm Catholic, so it's one thing. But like other stuff like that, like I think that you can have disagreements with people and be very civil about it. I think that um like a lot of my role models I would disagree with probably very, very strongly against, because I'm in film and I'm very interested in film. And as we all know, Hollywood is not exactly the most conservative place in the world. So I'm sure I would have like very, very strong disagreements with like most of my favorite directors or actors. I know I have a lot of disagreements with some of my favorite actors and whatnot. So it's you just have to agree to disagree. Yeah, where it's like as long as you can acknowledge that we're all trying to do what's best for the country, for everyone in it, and for our neighbors. Like as long as you can agree that we're all trying to act like faithfully and in good in the interest of everyone. I think that as long as we can agree on that, I think we can agree to disagree.
I totally agree.
Mhm.
Oh, so why do, in kind of in light of that, why do people find it hard to befriend like other people? Because like if we can agree with other friends and family, why can't we just get along with people on a normal daily basis?
I have to think about that a little bit because I'm not. It could be like, especially nowadays. I think it's not even like conservatives. I think like, a lot of people are very conscious about what they say politically, and they're concerned that not necessarily that like the other person is going to be like a horrible, awful, like totalitarian bad person, but I think that there's a fear that they'll get viewed that way, where they'll be like, oh, like if I express that I'm like left wing, all these like conservative people will hate me, or if I'm express I'm conservative, all these left wing people will hate me. And like if you don't know a person's politics, especially like I know I do. So like if I don't know what someone lines up with politically, I very much avoid anything that could be interpreted politically, because I'm like I don't know if this person how is they going to react to this, and so it's not like oh like I think they're a bad person. It's like do they think I'm are they going to think I'm a bad person? Like it's stuff like that where I think with how skewed the culture is, everyone's afraid that they're going to be perceived as bad if they find someone they disagree with politically, and so I think that that's everyone's just concerned of like not necessarily like they're going to be hanging out with evil people, but that everyone's going to think they're evil and not want to hang out with them. But I think there probably are still people who are like they go on the more like extreme sides who are like, oh, if you don't agree with my agenda, you're awful, evil. Like I think those people are there, but I think most people are the opposite, where they're afraid of being labeled as bad or evil, and so they don't want to like go out because if this person's like left wing and they're right wing, they're like, oh, I don't know, like, are they going to call me like a fascist? Are they going to call me a Nazi? Are they going to hate me? Are they going to think I'm evil? And like same goes the other way. So I don't. I think that's where most people lie at the end of the day.
Yeah, definitely. It just kind of reminded me the extremity in which you were talking about. Over the summer, there was like this huge trend about if you're so and so supporter, like unfollow me. And I'm like, well, then you're just not going to get the information or you're not going to be exposed to like different views. And I feel like, I don't know, it's like it's not hard to befriend people that are of differing values. It's just hard to have political conversations. Like you can talk about the weather, you can talk about music, but you can't have those kind of like in-depth conversations. So I feel like I don't know. people can I learned this in like a psychology class, but if you're like constantly disagreeing with someone, you can lose self-esteem. So I feel like a lot of people just don't want to like depress themselves in a way that would negatively impact their health partially.
Yeah, definitely. I think yeah, stress could be a big part of it because I know like especially nowadays there's a lot of mental health issues that or maybe it's just because it's people are more open to talking about it now, but there's a lot of mental health issues and I think that like just the added stress of like these people like hate me, or are they gonna not like me? Or like the stress of like, oh, are they bad? Like just the political stress, I think like they don't want to touch politics at all. And so like if you just hang out with people who are like minded, it's like you know that like they're gonna like you, they're gonna agree with you, you're not gonna be challenged. Like it's very like safe in the sense where it's like you're mentally or like you're protected, I guess you so to say. Like and I don't know how many I don't want to like say like, oh, like if I don't want to like attribute people to being like mentally insecure or unstable or anything like that. I'm just thinking that like stress could definitely be a factor. Like they just mentally they just don't want to deal with it. They just don't want all the pressure or stress or all that comes along with politics.
Yeah. Politics has become like super personal, and I feel like we need to start like drawing away from that because it does stress people out and it's not good for our country, the environment, or just like relationships as a whole at all.
Yeah, like I can't maybe you'll remember the whoever said the quote, I might not like what you say, but I'll die for your right to say it. That's like a summary of what the quote says. I forget who says that, but that I feel like that used to like back in the day that was the like how politics was, but I think nowadays, yeah, you're right. It's like very personal. Where it's like I don't think that that culture exists anymore. I don't think that culture of I'll die for your right to say it exists. I think it's like you shouldn't be saying that. Like that's awful. Like there's this weird culture where you like yeah, politics is very personal. It says a lot more about like you as a person. Where it's like, oh, if you believe this, then you must be a bad person or you must be a good person. I don't know. Like yeah, politics is weirdly personal these days.
Yeah.
I guess kind of going off on like all this is that I think recently I've heard from a couple of people like I think Ben Shapiro and some other commentator I follow. They mentioned this poll. I don't know. I don't have the poll, so like I'm not going to use that as like I'm not going to bring that up like as evidence. But it's a poll essentially that was saying that it's not just like conservatives who think they have to censor themselves like in public. It's like it's like a lot of people do. Like pretty much anyone except like very far left leaning people feel like they have to censor themselves. And I feel like, do you think that's adding to this like polarization culture where like everyone's afraid to actually say what they want to say, where or they're careful of what they say and they don't want to actually speak their mind because they're afraid of whatever, whether it be like people hating them or getting canceled or getting fired or getting socially ostracized? Like, do you think that like self censorship is making things worse, or like do you think it's like increasing that divide?
Um, that's actually a really good question. I think there's two types of people, especially nowadays. There's the outspoken ones, kind of like how you mentioned, and then those who do censor themselves. I feel like a lot of people, if they're not comfortable with talking politics or they don't necessarily want to get involved, they do try not to post or talk about politics in general, regardless of whether they believe certain things or not. Um, but I feel like people are just wary about cancel culture and on both sides. Like they don't know whether the company they're working for is conservative or liberal, or they don't know whether, I don't know, their boss or their cousin or whatever will just start talking about them on a social media account based on what they have to say. So I feel like it's just hindering conversations that could be had versus if people were more outspoken about it, then we could like see how people actually see the world versus like assuming, like assumptions are just not good. So assuming things are just, I don't know how to like phrase it, but it's just not like something that should be done. And yeah,
Yeah,
what about
I get
you?
what you're saying. I know sometimes it's hard to exactly put into words what you're trying to think, but I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. So I guess
Do
just
you
hmm,
oh,
what
do
are you
you
saying?
agree with do you agree with like the idea of censorship?
Um. I definitely think people do self censor. I don't know. I would actually be curious to figure out like how much people actually do or how true that is because I know people definitely do, but I wonder kind of how widespread it is because I know like a lot of people just don't want to talk about it. Because like I know I've definitely self censored like in classes and stuff, but I'd be curious as to how many like other people out there have also self-censored, because I don't really know. And so like maybe it is like a huge thing, like everyone's self-censoring, maybe it's not. And like I get the point of it, because like I'm like for instance with me in class, is that I don't want to, class is not the place I think to start like a political argument. Like my teacher says something, I'm like, no, that's wrong. Like I'm going to argue the conservative point. Like there's a time and a place I think for like political arguments and debates, and like 99% of the time in class, I don't think that's the place, even if they're like something you blatantly disagree with, because I've had a lot of that. But so I get the point of self-censoring. I get the point, and I get why people do it, because I do it in class and to an extent with like other people. I'd just be curious as to like how widespread it is, because I think there's a lot of people out there who are like, oh, like just kind of like how a lot of people think that like cancel culture is not real. There's a lot of people who say, oh, like people aren't self-censoring, like that's not a real thing that's going on. It could be interesting to figure out like what the exact like percentage or numbers are, because I'm curious to kind of see how widespread it actually is.
Definitely. Kind of going off censoring though, do you think um, how bad do you think that left wing or anti conservative bias exists in academics? Kind of like what you were talking about, academics, Hollywood, the media. How bad is it, in your opinion?
Hmm. With my experience, I think in general, like this is also building off my experience. So I don't know, like because there's always like some counterexample, like, oh, well, in this school they're not left leaning, but I think generally, I think yeah, academia is very left leaning, and it's becoming more and more so. Like a lot of my classes are very left leaning, and they're pretty like openly so. Like they're not even trying to hide it. It's very like left wing ideas or concepts. Like sometimes it's just like very overtly left wing. Like they're like, oh, like I support like left wing people. Like they just bring up like left wing politicians as like good people, stuff like that. And so I think that it's very there is this certain left wing bias in academia. Like even in high school, like my I don't know if you're familiar with Howard Zinn, but like he's getting referenced a lot like in history textbooks. Like he wrote our history textbook. He's used a lot, and he's very like not kind to America. Like for my U.S. history, like we read Howard Zinn, and it's a very like critical anti like I don't want to say like oh like he's anti-American bad like America's perfect, but he's like very like he has like very strong like anti-American bias. Like he's like oh America's evil, they like slaughtered all the Native Americans and they did this and that, and they like they all the slavery and segregation. Like America basically is just all of its sins. And so I think that that's very it's stuff like that where they're not just like overtly saying like oh yeah like left wing good, right wing bad, but they're giving a very strong narrative where it's like especially in history is America's bad. That's the I think America bad is probably like the biggest thing you get in history is just America bad, Europe bad, Western history culture bad. And it's not necessarily that like Western culture, Western history, or America is like should be free of criticism, but it's like 99% of their criticism seems directed at America or like Europe and stuff like that. And it's like, well, I get that, like trying to criticize like the dominant view, but to an extent, it's it goes beyond the realm of like academic like being like critical about things and just being like very just anti-America, especially when a lot of things just aren't fair. Like for instance, what I said with like Howard Zinn is like a lot of times people will say like just America is its sins, like America is slavery and removing the natives and like Japanese internment, and like America is just all these bad things, and they just a lot of times they just completely neglect all the good things, like portray even the good things in bad lights. Like apparently every president was evil. Like I don't know if you saw recently, but like there's a whole thing where like apparently now Abraham Lincoln is a bad president because he didn't demonstrate that Black Lives Matter to him, which is very weird for me because I think he'd be like the one where you would say that aside from like
Yeah.
Obama, but I don't know. Like it's there seems to be a very strong like anti-America bias in especially history, but just in academia in general, he has a very left-wing like, especially in terms of like climate and the environment and stuff like that. You can definitely pick up there's a left-wing bias, not like a healthy like let's analyze both sides, but it's like this is the correct side, this is what you should be thinking, and they don't even present like the other side, or if they do, is usually like some people say this, but the correct thing, and then they go on like an hour about like the left-wing view. And so like that's how I view it. I know there's probably a lot of people who would disagree or say it's not that bad, but what are your thoughts on academia?
I would have to kind of agree. I'm in a major that's pretty left-leaning, through psychology, and I feel like a lot of the textbooks that we read kind of just touch on very left-wing studies, like, the research is done by people that are clearly leftish, and I feel like that just biases everything that we learn, especially the concepts that we learn, and just kind of turns it into a social justice issue when it's just a concept. And I feel like not everything needs to have an undertone of social justice, but places like academics always have to try and I don't know, make the try and I guess I indoctrinate's the wrong word, but kind of encourage students to be more collective and kind of tell us what to do versus letting us make our own thoughts and decisions about what these concepts or what these studies could tell us how to function in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I totally get what you're saying about the like the social justice aspect, where like everything's a race issue, everything's a gender issue, everything's like a fill in the blank issue. Like it's never just like this is an issue or this is what happens. Like the environment, it's a racial issue because this, or it's a gender issue because this. Like, well, why can't it just be, why does it have to be a racial issue? Why can't it just be an issue that affects everybody? And like I I don't like the attempt to make everything like a social group issue, because like you're saying, it's very like it's a very collectivist kind of mindset where it's like you're not an individual, you're part of a group. And it's like it like I because like, I don't think it's that much of a racial issue, because yes, I'm sure that people get disproportionately affected in different groups by if you're following all the climate change stuff. It's like, yeah, like if like let's say what you're just let's, without getting into the climate change debate, let's say that everything you're saying is true, then that doesn't necessarily mean that like every single like black person, for instance, is getting affected in the same way, because like a black person living in like LA is going to be affected very differently than like a black person in Michigan or a black person in Texas or a black person like in Africa. And so I think that it, I don't know. I don't like the collectivization attempt where it's like because it's part of that mindset. It's like you're not an individual. You're part of this group. You are this. You are a like a white male or a black female, or you are a gay man. Like it's very it is a very collectivist mindset. Like I said, like I'm very pro the individual, so I don't like that collectivist like trying to lump everything together. Like I think that the biggest thing is that it is just an issue. It's not, it doesn't have to be a social issue. Like it's not a social group issue. And yes, like I'm not saying that like people can get disproportionately affected. Like yes, like this issue might affect like black people more than white people, or might affect Indians more than Asians, but that doesn't automatically make it a race issue, because we should just be focused on the issue and helping people. It doesn't matter that like one group is getting affected more. What matters is that people are getting affected.
Definitely.
And so then I guess one last thing I want to touch on real quick is so we talked a lot about like just kind of like in academia and like friends and families and whatnot, but a lot of things, I don't know if you've heard this on campus much, but I'm on campus with YAF, and we're out like at our table, like seeing people want to come to our events or whatever. We get a lot of people who just say they're just not interested in politics. Like you'd be like, oh hey, do you want to like come to YAF or like our meetings? Do you want to come to this event? They'll be like, oh well, I'm just not interested in politics. And I totally get that answer, but I'm wondering how many people do you think it is? Like, do you think that the people who are not interested, do you think that's a big majority, like 80, like 90%? Like there's like the 5% that's like us, and the 5% that's like the left wing, or do you think it's like that's actually like more of a minority? You think it's just like an excuse for people who are like maybe they don't agree, and there's like if I'm a conservative, I come up and like say like, oh hey, do you want to come to our conservative event? To like a left wing person, maybe just like, I don't agree. I'm not interested in politics just because they don't want to engage in it. I don't know. Like, how big do you think this not interested in politics group is? I guess.
Um, for our on-campus not interested in politics, I think it's very small. I think most people that tell us that they're not interested in politics are actually just wanting to avoid confrontation, and they're more of the nicer people. We've had quite a few not so nice people show up to our table, but that's for another time. But I think generally across the United States, a lot of people actually aren't interested in politics. If you go to a midtown in the middle of nowhere, they're not going to be as invested in politics as, celebrities in LA or maybe Wall Street people in New York. So I think the average person aren't as invested in politics as maybe college students or more like higher powered people. What's your opinion on it?
I definitely think that you're probably right about how on campus, I think a lot more people are invested in politics than they might let on to. Because I think that even if they don't say they're interested in politics, they definitely have their thoughts on it. Maybe it's just that they don't feel like they're like what, yeah, maybe they just want to avoid confrontation. Maybe they don't feel like they're adequately prepared to like engage in like a political discussion. Because I totally get that like there's a lot of people who are just like kind of passively into politics. So they'll be like, yeah, I have my views and my thoughts. But like if you try to like engage someone who's like in like a political group like yeah for someone like Ben Shapiro, like you would not be able to defend what you think is like you're just passively enjoy or like enjoy politics. And so like you're not always like constructing these really great arguments and like challenging yourself and coming up with like all these like defenses and points. And so like if someone comes up to you and be like, hey, do you want to enter like an intellectual discussion, they'll be like, if they know they're unprepared, I don't think they want to walk into that just knowing that they're probably going to get stomped on. And so I think that that could be a thing too, is that there's a lot of people who have these political views, but they don't feel like they're politically well versed enough to actually engage in politics. They'll be like, yeah, I have my thoughts and my opinions, and I think this and that, but I'm not going to engage in politics because I'm just going to get run over by people on all sides. I'm not going to be able to stand up to this. Like, so I think it could be yeah, part of that confrontation, just like they're not prepared to get involved in politics. Really.
Definitely, I agree. I feel like you said, people are passively involved or they know generally what they like, but it's just I feel like there's so many things in culture that changes politically that it's just hard to really keep up with it if you're not like invested in politics in general.
Yeah, because I definitely get that there's so many issues in politics, and there's so many things going on, so many different like news stories that it's very hard to keep up with if you're not like it's not like your full time job or like a really passionate interest. It's like even for someone like me, where like I'm definitely like much more involved in politics than like the average person would be. I think that like there's even some issues where it's like if someone came up and wanted to talk about like I'm trying to think of like criminal justice reform. They'd be like, oh, like I'm going to debate you on this. Like I just don't know enough about that to debate you on that. It's like you probably would win the debate because I just don't like I have my principles, but I don't know any of the statistics. I don't know any of the facts. I don't know any of the arguments. Like I would be very unprepared. I don't know criminal justice reform like at all, so I wouldn't know how to handle myself in that kind of a debate. So that's not something I would want to engage in. And so I can definitely understand that aspect. Yeah. I think we can probably wrap it up now because I got a class in a few
Yeah.
minutes. But
Oh, no
yes,
worries.
I
Oh,
guess
yeah. Shoot. All right. Thanks all for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and all our social medias, which will be linked in our bios. We look forward to seeing you next time.
yep. See you around.
Bye.
Bye.